When I was a sophomore in college, I lived in a small but beautiful historic studio apartment in a small East Coast city that had somewhat of a reputation for crime, danger. However, the neighborhood I lived in was usually considered one of the good neighborhoods. It was close to the city's university, and was mostly students living there, especially on the street my building was on. My building was a huge 4-story townhouse, if you can really call it that. It was really a mansion as a whole, built in 1895. The architecture was really awesome. Built-in bookshelves and huge mahogany pocket doors that slid into the walls. Anyway, the building wasn't exactly in mint condition, and my landlord was pretty lazy. He would always come by and check up on things, and make promises to get stuff fixed, but never really got around to doing much of anything. The apartment I was renting was on the first floor. My front door immediately on the left, as you walked in the building's door to the street. This door, the building's front door, which from the street opened to a small lobby area with only one door in it, mine, and a staircase to the other apartments upstairs, was huge and heavy and was never locked. In fact, you couldn't lock it, and, in fact, it didn't even close all the way. So basically the door to my apartment was open to the street. I asked my landlord countless times to please do something about the front door, but he never did anything. Well, one night, I was getting home from work and it was very late, about 3:45 a.m. I worked as a pizza delivery driver at a place that was open really late every night, and I was just sitting on my couch, watching a little TV before I went to bed. I had also gotten totally naked, something I truly loved being able to do considering I lived alone. Anyway, not 10 minutes since I'd gotten home and sat down, I hear 3 slow knocks at my door. I'm thinking, who the fuck would be at my door at this hour? What could they possibly want? Why didn't I hear the building's front door open like I normally do? Young and naive, I was half scared and half intrigued. I put a robe on and slowly crept towards the door, which, by the way, was literally right next to the couch where I was sitting. At this point in time, my door didn't have a peephole, so I just kind of take a leap of faith and open the door. When I did, a tall, emaciated, middle-aged man stood staring down at me, with low eyes and a grin. He was wearing all black, many layers, and a big black trench coat. The first thing he said was, "Can I come in?" With the door barely open, I got a deep pit in my stomach and just went, no man, what's up?" He just stared into my eyes for a second, clearly disappointed, and then said, "I've seen you around," and started to grin again. The pit in my stomach had evolved into a churning sensation, and I was starting to get nauseous. "Yeah, I've been watching you, and I like the way you look," he said. "So you gay? Bisexual?" I was just like, "I don't know, but it's late and I'm going to go to bed. Bye." He kind of nodded and lingered for a second, as did I, watching to make sure I saw him leave the building. Once he did, I closed the door, locked it, and stood with my hand still in the knob for a good minute at least. After I snapped out of my shock, I ran over to my couch and pushed it up against the door. I ended up sleeping on the couch that night, even though it was right there. It just made me feel safer, like I could hear if something happened. Well, nothing happened that night. It wasn't until about a week later, on one of my nights off from work, that I was sitting around my apartment winding down by myself, after I had had some friends over, drinking and smoking, a little bit, as college kids will do. All of a sudden, I heard a weird rattling noise coming from across the room. So I turned off the music I was playing, to find out that it was coming from none other than my front doorknob. I looked at it for a second, and saw that both the knob and the top lock were jiggling. Someone was trying to get in. Like a deer in the headlights, I was frozen, staring at things wiggle and shake, until I started to see the top lock actually budge and start to turn. I leapt up from my chair and soared to the door, grabbing tightly on the lock and forcefully twisting it back to being locked. The jiggling of the lock and knob stopped for a second because whoever it was clearly knew now that I knew. It was only a second though before they just started struggling again, and I had to use all my might to keep it still. Sweat was dripping down my forehead and my ribcage, and after about 15 seconds of wrestling with this intruder, it suddenly stopped. And I heard the building door open and close, and footsteps ran down the stairs of the stoop to the sidewalk. Just like I was before, I was paralyzed, with my hands at the door for a good while, before I realized I was crying and shaking, and that I needed to call someone. My instinct was to call the police. In hindsight, I regret this for the following reasons. I was basically having a panic attack while I was on the phone with 911, and actually threw up during the call. And I think that's when they decided I was just fucked up or something. When the two police got to my apartment, they stood in my doorway as I struggled to recount to them what had happened as I'm shaking and crying. I notice at one point they're both smirking and laughing, and I say, "What's funny right now?" One of them goes, "It reeks of marijuana." I was just like, okay? And basically argued with them after that. Long story short, they ended up confiscating a bunch of shit from my apartment, and basically turning the whole situation into a little mini drug bust. Although they said they weren't going to charge me with anything. Just take my shit. Nothing about this attempted break-in besides keep your door locked. I was devastated and felt so helpless. I hate to make this story so long, so I'll try to keep the last part short. Basically, this same scenario happened one more time, about 2 weeks from the last time. Only instead of calling the police, I called my dad, who raced down in an hour. 2-hour drive from his house to this place, with a crowbar up his sleeve. Unfortunately, by the time he had gotten there, whoever it was had already left. They didn't struggle very hard this time. My dad ended up cussing out my landlord and demanding he get the door fixed and install a new lock and a peephole in my door. He did make this happen within a reasonable amount of time, and I also got one of those bars you wedge between the doorknob and the floor, as well as an aluminum baseball bat to protect myself with, so I felt a lot better from then on. Needless to say though, I ended my lease for that apartment a month early, and never moved back to that street. I never found out for sure who was trying to pick my locks, and if it was the guy who had come to my door the first time. But whoever it was, this is by far the most creepy thing that has happened to me to date. I usually feel fairly safe in my town, but this one incident has certainly awakened to me the fact that no place is perfectly safe. It was this New Year's Eve just gone, when my friend called me and asked if I wanted to go to the New Year's Eve festival at the beach, with her and her boyfriend. Being the kind of person who normally just stays at home, and does nothing special for this particular holiday, I of course agreed. Every New Year's Eve my town holds a festival at the beach in celebration. Rides and games are set up, bands play live music, clubs hold late-night fancy-dress parties, and at midnight on the dot, a series of firework displays are put on for the public. Normally, thousands of people turn up, so the beach can get quite loud and crowded, but it's still a pleasant atmosphere all round. Before hanging up, my friend Jess asked me if I will pick up her and her boyfriend Tyler on the way to the beach. She also lets me know that one of her other close friends is coming along, and that we should go straight to her unit so that we can walk down to the festival together. I tell Jess no problem, and then go to get ready. In about half an hour I'm ready. I do not yet have my license, so I asked my dad if he would pick up my friends and drop us all off. He agreed. It only takes about 3 minutes to drive to my friend's place, and then a further 10 minutes to drive to my other friend's unit. My other friend Haley lives in a small 2-bedroom unit with her mother. The unit is right next to the beach, and it only takes about 5 minutes to walk down to where the festival takes place. When we arrive, she is already outside waiting for us, standing on the balcony and enjoying the sunset. We all file out of the car, making sure to thank my dad for dropping us off, and then head upstairs to greet Haley. We all hung and began to catch up as we hadn't seen each other for a couple of months. Graduation, work, and life got in the way. We all headed inside for about 10 minutes to grab a drink and catch up a bit more. Haley's mother came out and talked to us for a bit as well. At this point, the sun had almost well and truly disappeared, and so we decided that this was the perfect time to head down to the festival. The walk down to the beach was pleasant. It was a warm summer night. There was a cool breeze to ward off the heat, and the whole area smelled of cotton candy, buttered corn, and warm donuts. We spent the first few hours going on rides together, and then we went and bought some food and sat down on the sand to eat it. So far the night was amazing. As usually, whenever I went out with my friends, there was always a parent with us. No parents this time. It felt great. Felt like freedom. After eating, we went up to the stage where the live bands were playing, and danced for about an hour. There were plenty of classics being played, such as YMCA, Time Warp, and various hits from Greece. All in all, it was a really fun time. After an hour of dancing to music, the 4 of us decided to head back to Haley's unit for a drink of water, as we had spent all of our money. At this point, it was well and truly dark, around 11 o'clock, and the heat of the day had subsided to a pleasant warmth. We walked along the path merrily saying Happy New Year to every passing group or cop. A few partygoers on the 4th floor of an apartment complex shouted, "Hope you have an epic New Year," drunkenly at us. We laughed and wished them the same. As we walked further away from the crowds and the noise, the light grew less and less. There aren't many streetlights near my friend's unit, and we were soon engulfed in a soothing darkness, with only the moon to light our way. It was at this point that I, for some reason, began to feel uneasy. It was too quiet for my tastes. You know that feeling you get when you're being watched? Or at least you think you're being watched. That exact feeling washed over me, and I subconsciously moved to walk in between Haley and Tyler, instead of walking on the outside of the group. I shrugged off the feeling after that, attributing it to the fact that perhaps my ears were just used to the loud noises of the festival. They were, after all, ringing a bit. We ran into another group of people we knew from school along the way, and the feeling was completely forgotten. I had missed these people after graduation, and immediately struck up friendly, light-hearted conversation. We parted ways as we made it to Haley's unit block, and climbed the stairs to her unit. Haley's mother and the mother's boyfriend greeted us upon our arrival, and we all got a drink of water from the refrigerator before relaxing together on the couch. We were all a tad worn out at this point, and the fireworks weren't for another hour, so we decided to chill at the unit and head down to the beach at around 11:45. We all joked around and had a snack, and then Haley asks if she can sleep over at my place. I ring my folks, check it's okay with them, and they give me the okay. My parents love having Haley over. She's a very well-mannered person, and likes to help out where she can. At 11:45 we all leave the unit, and begin heading down to the beach. We only get about a minute down the road before Haley says that she has forgotten her pain medication for her bad knee, which she is supposed to take before bed. At this, Jess seems a little annoyed, but reluctantly agrees that we should go back so that we do not have to make another trip to hers at the end of the night. We head back, and the whole way Jess seems a little distant, like her mind isn't on the conversation at hand, and she's focused on something else. I am the most quiet and observant one in the group, so I notice her silence pretty quickly, since usually she's a big chatterbox. I ask her if she's alright, and she replies with, "Of course." So I simply leave her to her thoughts. After retrieving Haley's pain medication, we head back out again. This time Jess suggests that we walk on the other side of the road, where it is more well lit, and there are parents with their children on the playground. We think nothing of it and agree, as both Haley and I have poor night sight, and a bit more light would be rather welcome. When we are halfway across the road, Jess mutters to us, "Don't look behind us." My first thought is that maybe there is a drunk with their pants down taking a piss against a wall or something. But then Jess adds, "Walk faster." I begin to feel uneasy and immediately obey her request, knowing that whenever Jess seriously tells us to do something, it's usually for a good reason. None of us look back, despite that nagging human instinct to look. I trust Jess. When we are across the road, I ask Jess what is wrong, and what has her so on edge. She replies to me, "There's 3 guys in black hoodies following us. I recognize them from earlier." Earlier? I think to myself, puzzled. And then Jess explains that she saw those same 3 men, they had to be men, they were tall and bulky, when we came to the unit for water earlier. A chill runs down my spine at this, and I realize that my sense of being watched probably came from those men. What made me even more creeped out was the fact that they had waited all that time for us to come out. Unable to resist, I glance sideways out of my peripheral vision, and my heart hammers in my chest when I notice 3 men. They are indeed rather pointedly following us, and they have their hoods zipped up all the way to their chins. This would not be so unusual if not for the fact that it was a hot night. There was no need for a hoodie or any kind of jacket, and they were wearing bandanas over their mouths and noses. I could not make out either of their facial features. This scared me. Jess prompts us again not to look and suggests we walk even faster. We do so despite the fact that Haley, Tyler and I are all tall and strongly built people. I should mention now that I am an 18-year-old female, and despite my build and reasonable strength, I understandably didn't want to tangle with 3 big, unknown men dressed all in black with bandanas covering their features. It crossed my mind that they probably thought we were good targets. Jess was short and thin. They most likely heard that Haley needs pain medication. I walked with an obvious limp as I have arthritis in my right knee, and Tyler had his hands full, being the pack mule, as they call it. Despite Jesse's instruction, I can't help but give the occasional glance at the 3 men, and of course they continued to follow us. They had even increased their pace to nearly match ours, and kept looking over at us. I think they meant to intimidate us, as they made it quite obvious that they were staring at us. I ceased to look after realizing that they could probably tell I was keeping an eye on them, and instead opted to use my keen hearing to make sure they stayed across the road. I wasn't fond of this, as they could have had a knife or a gun or anything, and if they suddenly sprinted at us, I wouldn't be prepared. But I didn't want to provoke them by staring. I am not a fast runner, and my stamina leaves much to be desired. At this point the path ends and gives way to bushes and shrubs. The bushland is quite easy to go around, but doing so would mean moving closer to the unknown men following us. None of us wanted to do that, so we all make an unspoken agreement to take a shortcut through the bushes. The bushland doesn't go on for very long, and it would take us straight to the festival where we could quite possibly lose those men. We head into the bushes, taking care to stay together, and watch for snakes, as summer is the season when snakes like to come out the most. especially at the beach. It's Snake City. About halfway through, we all recognize the sound of dried grass and leaves crunching underfoot. Then we hear rapid, heavy footsteps. We all broke into a sprint, not daring to look back at that point. We didn't have to look to know the men were chasing us, and their confidence at going after 4 fully grown teenagers pretty much assured me they were all armed with weapons of some sort. We were not armed with anything, and quite frankly we were all so spooked that we couldn't think straight. Our only instinct was to run as fast as possible. We made it out of the bushland together, raced across the car park, and slowed to a jog when we reached the crowds. We didn't stop. But as we steadily slowed to a hurried walk, I looked over my shoulder and recognized the 3 unknown men lurking across the car park. Moonlight glinted off the surface of a metallic object in the taller one's hand, and I immediately fell ill. We hurried to where the biggest crowd was, gathered on the sand in preparation for the fireworks. Picking a spot between 2 large groups, we settled down and caught our breaths. Funnily enough, all 4 of us have asthma, which we often joke about, saying that we found each other and bonded because of it, and we were all panting quite heavily. Tyler and I have it a bit worse than Haley and Jess, and you could hear us wheezing as we panted. Soon the fireworks started, and we had all calmed enough to somewhat enjoy them, although the unknown men were still in the back of our minds. Our original plan had been to leave before the fireworks were finished, so that we could avoid the big crowds. But instead, we opted to leave with the crowds. We walked down the road to a bigger car park where my dad was going to pick us up, making sure to stay around people. When we reached the car park, I called my dad, and he said that he would be there to pick us up in around 10 minutes. After hanging up, I sat on the side of the path with my friends and waited. 5 minutes passed, and, bored, I decided to look around as there were still many bustling crowds, making their way to the cars. There was a bit of a traffic jam too, as many cars were trying to leave at the same time. I looked across the road and realized with a jolt that the 3 men in the black hoodies were there, half hidden by a tree, where there was no light. Even though I couldn't see their eyes, I could tell they were staring right back. They knew I'd spotted them. The taller one discreetly showed his knife, waving it a little, as if to taunt me. Then he raised it to his throat and made a slow, mock slicing motion. I quickly told my friends, and we moved to a different spot, making sure to stay in the light and stay in sight of people. My dad arrived soon after, and we all quickly climbed into the car. None of us spoke a word of what happened, and since then, I haven't had any issues with anyone following me or my friends. It still gives me the creeps, though. Whoever those men were, their intentions could not have been good. I'm not sure this belongs here, but as one of the strangest things to happen to me, I really would like to share it. It really is bizarre. It's the story of a man that I don't know, who called me frequently for years. The start. It started mid-9th grade. I wasn't especially popular, so I never bothered to silence my phone in class. But that day I got a call from Restricted and got in some trouble. When I left class, I saw a voicemail. I naturally assumed it was a prank call. The voicemail was mostly in Spanish, with some "I love yous" thrown in, since it was restricted. I ruled out a wrong number, and I assumed it was a very lame prank call. I was actually a pretty lonely kid, though, so I appreciated the attention. Just as I finished checking the call, I got another. I asked him who it is, and he doesn't seem to understand. I tried to ask in Spanish as well. He switched entirely to broken English, and more or less just replies in yeses or nos, and intrigued sounds, and always, very genuinely, says he loves me. I run with the lame prank call idea, but the calls never let up, and he never said much besides listening to what I say, responding with some sort of sound, and saying how much he loved me. The progression. As time went on, I decided it couldn't be a student. This man had calls at all hours, during class, during dinner, while I slept, etc. Sometimes I'd get over like 50 calls a day, at seemingly random intervals. Just every few minutes, sometimes, naturally, I'd get angry. I'd scream and threaten him. I'd say like, "No llama, policía, no quiero, por favor, pare, no más." He'd just plead that he loved me. Mostly, though, I grew accustomed to it. I usually ignore it and delete the voicemails. Also, I was pretty depressed during those times, so sometimes I'd just answer and talk. He didn't seem to understand, so I'd just cry to him sometimes. As usual, he'd respond with, "Oh, yes, I love you," and the like. I eventually made friends, and got a boyfriend. They asked about the calls. I joked that it was my weird Spanish stalker. They, at first, assumed it was a prank. I let them speak to the guy. They quickly thought it was very creepy and told him never to call back. He always did. And yes, by then, my phone was almost always on silent. The resolution. After 2 years, the calls slowed down. Maybe I'd get 1 or 2 a week or something. But then it started picking up again, and I had had enough. I went back to the anger. I, in my best Spanish, told him to back off. I went vulgar. I went loud. I told him this was in no way welcomed, and that I'd make sure he got in trouble. I told him it was stalking, etc. Nothing changed. No reaction more than a pouting sound, insisting that he loves me. I found a free trial of some app thing that unblocks a blocked number. I forget how. Something where it calls them back after they hang up. 800 numbers use it or something. Well, I found his number, and it had a familiar area code, but no number I recognized. They lived perhaps 30 minutes away from me, outside of my school district though. Creepy. Well, I called him. He picked up and didn't say anything. I told him I found his number and that I called the cops on him. I didn't. Then I blocked him. The aftermath. I posted the number on Facebook, asked if anyone knew him. I offered rewards. I went through everyone in my contact list I knew. I never found out who it was. I don't think I'd ever meet him. No idea how he got my number, or why he kept calling for years. Really, he must not have had a job or anything, or slept much. Well, this was all years ago, but I still think it's a really weird, unresolved thing. Recently I asked my boyfriend, who knows Spanish, to call the number. I went back through my Facebook post to find it. A lady answered. As soon as my boyfriend spoke, she said not to call and hung up. He called back and she just picked up and hung up the phone. Weird. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for watching episode 27. Also thanks for all your kind words and the great feedback recently, I really appreciate it. We just passed the 2,500 subscriber mark, so I was very happy about that. I just hope I can keep you all entertained, and fingers crossed for 2,500 more. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.